Okay, let's pray and start. Thank you, God, for another opportunity to gather and explore your will for our lives and our families. And I pray again for courage and endurance and perseverance for the families represented here, that they would embrace these principles and put them into practice in their homes, that we might be a people who glorify you in our families, that a hurting world would see something different and want what we have. Be glorified in all we do and all we say. In your name we pray. Amen. Okay, so today, first time obedience. Immediate obedience. And by any other name, do what I say. Now, please. So, as we talk about this, I want to review what we talked about before, that it matters what your worldview is, what your baseline is for parenting. It is so easy to mix what we hear from culture, even sometimes what we hear from church, what our parents have told us. It's easy to mix that in and add it to what I say. And so, I said before and I say it again, you search the word, these principles, and if you find principles in the scripture, and we already talked about, there's not a lot of specific do this, do that with your children as far as their behavior is concerned. You follow God's teaching, but there's a tendency, I think, for us to take what sounds good from culture or from church or family or friends and kind of try to add it to what we're saying. So I just want to caution you to be real careful that you're not adding to the word, so to speak. There is blessing and grace for us to implement God's principles, not God's and. Okay, so let's just agree to be real careful about that. And there were a couple of questions that were mentioned last week at the end, and I wanted to address them because I think they have bearing on what we're going to talk about tonight. And I think it was Haley who said that she had heard, you should pick your battles. And there's always some truth. Well, I'm going to speculate. There's almost always some truth in the things that we hear. So, yeah, you don't want to die on every hill. But oftentimes we use phrases like that. You need to pick your battles to say, I'm just too tired to deal with this right now. And that is not picking your battles. Picking your battles in a sound way would be major on the majors, major on the things we've decided are important to us as a family, major on the things that God has said are important to us as a people who are called by his name. And so, yes, we want to pick our battles. And so that might mean, and I've seen it played out in different ways, because have so many kids with such a big gap. We've seen a whole generation of kids grow up and then leave their families' homes. And so I've seen families whose battleground was the length of their boys' hair. And I've seen families who chose not to make that their battleground because they felt like those weren't moral issues. Now, I guess in some homes it could be a moral issue, kind of depends on the kid and what's going on, if that's representative of rebellion or whatever. I'm not going to speculate about that. But in the sense that we need to pick our battles and let them be the battles that God would have us pick, yes, absolutely. But we don't want to major on things that really don't matter in the grand scheme of things. And I promise you, as your kids get older, you'll find all these things that you were so certain about when your kids were young, and you were so certain those were hills to die on. And then you think, oh, life's too short. What was I thinking? We weren't going to teach our kids we didn't want our kids to know about dinosaurs because we felt like they weren't real. And that was before we understood how dinosaurs fit into the creation story. It was just ignorance on our part, but we thought, no, at the time, it was real closely tied to evolution. I mean, it still is, but you understand what I'm saying. And let me think of some of the other tattoos. We won't go into that, but we had these real strong ideas about tattoos. So just for a little perspective, my ears are pierced. I got my ears pierced when I was 12. And I want to tell you that when I was 12, it was 1972, and it was scandalous to get your ears pierced in the Christian community when you were in 1972. You were not to mutilate your body. and this was seen as mutilating your body. And thankfully, my parents were heathen enough to let me get my ears pierced. My point being that, yes, there are some things that we certainly need to consider, but there are things that, maybe we are so sure that we're sure, and we ought not be so sure that we're sure. So let's just stick with what God says about the way we relate to people. So as we talk about immediate obedience, I want you to bear in mind, I hope you either visited the site with the 21 rules for this house, or downloaded it, or bought it. Some have bought it. Because those kinds of principles are really good principles to use when you're deciding what you're going to require your kids to obey on, what kind of requests you're going to make and require obedience from your kids, because those were biblical principles of how we are supposed to relate to one another. And so those are really good as a place to start. Let those be your focus. And I want us to keep in mind too that we can present roadblocks to our success. Sometimes we are the biggest problem. Now, that can mean two things. One, we might be inconsistent in implementing what we want to implement in our home, and we might be a bad example. If we're screaming, if we pout, if we emotionally manipulate with a silent treatment, if we do these things, we are a big problem in our home, and we can hardly expect our children to do anything other than what they see us demonstrate, every day. So, you and I have to be really careful. A friend of mine and I used to joke about, we were homeschooling at a homeschool co-op, and we used to joke that homeschooling wasn't about the education of your children, it was about the education of the parents, the one they didn't get while they were in school, because little kids are too young and dumb to know that they should pay attention to that stuff. And so I think parenting is a lot about us being transformed into the image of Christ, and God just uses these little people in our home to test your patience, to test your resolve, to test your knowledge of the Word, So anyway, I think sometimes it's more about us. And then another roadblock, and I point this out especially to this, kind of group just searching for, okay, what are we going to do with our family? What kind of family do we want to have? How do we want to implement the means to achieve that family is, and we talked about this before, sometimes mom and dad aren't in agreement. And this goes back to sometimes our example being a bad example. I know people who are very competitive and everything they have to win. And when husband and wife are competitive, you both lose because you're one flesh. So that can't stay. And that's a bad plan for parenting, to pit mom and dad against each other. And I don't know about y'all's house, it didn't take my brother and I long to figure out which parent to ask for which thing. And my brother and I were pretty good kids as far as kids go. I mean, we weren't perfect or anything, but we were pretty good kids. But we figured it out, and kids are really smart, and they quickly figure out, if you want X, go ask mom. If you want Y, go ask dad, or those kinds of things. So I highly recommend, and especially when you start talking about immediate obedience, that you get on the same page. So our philosophy was, and we're going to, not next week, but the week after, we're going to talk about the way to make this happen. Our policy was, if dad said it, even if I didn't agree, in front of the kids, that's what it was. Let's just be honest. Sometimes we're mad at our spouse and we want, so we like it when the kids come to us and they get a positive response from us. And so we can play, even us as adults, we can play one another against one another in our parenting. And so I hope you understand what I'm saying. Be careful of that. And if you're going to work toward requiring first-time obedience, you really got to be in total agreement on what it is you're going to require obedience for. Because if it's really important to one of you and not important to the other one's not going to be as inclined to, implement whatever it is that, to be sure that whatever it is you've said you want done, gets done. So let me add this disclaimer about what we're talking about here. We're talking about behavior, and So training our children's behavior, training their wills, not breaking their spirits, but training their wills, teaching them to control their emotions, teaching them to control their will, align it with God's word, is the ultimate goal. And one of the means of doing that is to train their behavior. So I'm not saying that when we train their behavior, we're training their hearts. It does, the byproduct is, and I've seen it in our own home with two just imperfect kind of bumbling parents, is it's almost as if it hones their radar for obeying good authority, if you will. I'm not sure I'm actually phrasing that right, but our goal was to teach our children to obey those in authority over them and discern as they were mature and able when that they shouldn't obey someone in authority, because obviously for your safety there are times like that. But I just want to be sure that you understand. I'm not saying if we teach our kids to obey us immediately, then it follows that they will come to know Jesus and live a wonderful life and everything will be hunky-dory. I'm not saying, this is not an if-then equation. Ephesians 6:1, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. It's the first commandment with a promise that it may go well with you and you may live long in the land. So, I think it's a byproduct of our teaching them to obey immediately. It's good for us to settle in our heads that we are in a position of authority that is ordained by God. So when we ask our children to do things, even if they don't understand, even if they don't agree, even if nobody else in your family agrees, your church doesn't agree, whatever, God put us in authority. And so we're well within our rights, if you will, well within our rights, not the word I want to use, it is our responsibility to ask our children to do things that cause them to obey, all right? And we must remember that we must be intentional with this authority. It's not just go get me my coffee, fold those clothes. I mean, that's not the point. And I don't think you're here because you believe that's the point, but we must be intentional about the things that we ask our kids to do, because we are training their wills to submit themselves to our authority and then later to other godly authorities in their life. And it is imperative, and this is where I find it to be really hard, it's imperative that you and I remain calm and kind all the time, because in the beginning, they don't know, because we haven't taught them what our expectations are. And so for us to get frustrated and impatient is completely out of line, because you don't know what you don't know, and our kids don't know these things that we're going to start teaching them. So we must be calm and kind. Once you and I lose control, we just might as well look for the reset button and press reset and start again. And as we do this, I mentioned before breaking things down into small pieces. And sometimes, depending on the ages of your kids, you might just have to break down whatever it is you want them to do into small pieces and just require one little piece of obedience, because that's all they're able to do at that developmental age. So let me tell you a story about first-time obedience, which is defined as immediate, cheerful, and just like I asked. So often, kids will obey you and they will sulk and kick their feet and knock something over, and they're mad, or they pout all day long, they give you the silent treatment, or they kind of do what you ask, but not quite, And so that's not obedience, and it's vital that you and I hold them to that standard. Again, as they're developmentally able, hold them to the standard of, that's not like I said, please do it again, that kind of thing. Otherwise, they just learn, you've probably met grown-ups who just kind of obey the law and just kind of do what their boss asks, but, not exactly. So immediate, cheerful, and just like I asked, right? Even, again, we're just flawed, and we might ask too much sometime, and we're just flawed, in which case we ask for their forgiveness if we have sinned against them by asking more of them than they're able to do. Our goal is to create habits. I promise you, and some of you have already seen this, this tiny little tiny little steps impacting your homes in a positive way. And that's what we did. And we were like, wow, this stuff works. Let's just keep doing this. We're after habits because we don't want every time we tell our children to do something, they go, let me ponder and see how I'm feeling. So for example, I'm just thinking of when Ben had the girls out in this situation with the boat. If they had not obeyed him when he said, stay right here, it was a dangerous situation, they could have been harmed. And so you don't want your young children trying to exercise their immense judgment on a situation where they are not equipped to do that. We just want them to obey. Daddy said, stay right here. I'll stay right here. I might cry, but by golly, I'm going to stay right here, you know. So we do what we can. He probably didn't say, and don't cry. He said, just stay right here. So here's our story of first-time obedience. I told you we lived in this little 76 by 14 foot mobile home. It's like 900 square feet about, Chris. You know, it's like like this, about this big. So I had the edge of easy access to Ben. But we heard about this concept. I never even heard first-time obedience. What is that? You know, I had never even heard of it. But we read about it. We thought, okay, this makes sense. I want my children to obey me first thing. And so I set about to teach Ben what that meant. And so I was in the kitchen doing something. He's in the den playing. And I just, in my head, I thought, okay, this is going to be proactive, a training session. So he's playing. I'm doing the dishes. I said, Ben, come here, please. And, you know, he just continued to play. Because, like, that's what they do, because he'd never really paid attention to me before. So he was 2 at the time, so I could do this. We'll talk about older kids in a minute. But so I went over to him. I picked him up, and I brought him to where I was. I said, thank you. You obeyed Mommy. You did a good job. Now, he really didn't obey me. He really wasn't even paying attention. He didn't know what was going on. But it was the first step appropriate to his complete lack of knowledge. It was the first step in teaching him. Oh, number one, when Mom says, Ben, I should listen, you know. So it was a first step. And so I don't remember exactly what we did, but I might have sat down on the floor with him and read him a book. You did such a good job. Thank you for obeying Mommy. Now, our children do not need our thanks for obeying us, but I'm training, I'm teaching. This is positive. Thank you, you did do well. You know, I appreciate that. But they don't obey us because it's a transaction. I was just making it pleasant, if you will. So I sent him back off. He went and played some more. And about 20 minutes later, I said, Ben, Mommy says, I said, Ben, come here. And he looked up at me, and it was like, this is interesting, you know, and he didn't come. So I went over and I got him. I picked him up and I brought him, you know, you did a good job. You obeyed Mommy. We'll sit down and read a book, blah, blah, blah. Sent him on his way again. 20 minutes later, Ben, come here. So he didn't come, so I go over and I get him. Well, this time this game is not quite so fun anymore, so he, you know, flings himself on the ground, you know, and I picked him up, and he was not as amenable to the training session as he had been. Anyway, so he's, you know, kind of fussing with me a little bit. And so I brought him over to where I was, sat down, read a book, played a game, whatever, and then he went on his way. And I thought, okay, that's enough for today. You know, because I'm just teaching. We kind of jump from, okay, I've shown you once, now demonstrate it. And if we have, like in this case, Ben was just 2, so he'd only had 2 years of me not following through with anything I'd asked him. But 2 years is a long time when you've only been on the planet 2 years, you know. So I just stopped, and the next day we started again. And pretty soon he realized, okay, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to come over there when she says, come here, you know, we're going to play a game or whatever. And as we began to do it, I began to explain to him why. Mommy is trying to teach you how to obey because it is pleasing to God when we obey. And so we're going to practice. And that's what we're doing. We're just going to practice. And so I need you to be careful to listen for my voice. And if you hear me call your name, you need to do what I ask. And you know, it was as simple as that. Bearing in mind, I did say that sometimes he wasn't too crazy about this, and so we can't have it all. We can't have their physical obedience and the cheerful attitude and the immediate all at the same time. That's the end goal, all right? So don't get wonky and off in the weeds if they're not cheerful in the beginning, because they're probably not going to be. They're going to be confused. Like, what is this? You've never required me to do really what you've asked me to do before. What is this madness that's going on in our home? And over the course of a week, probably, he began to get it, that this is what we're doing. Now, at some point, when they get it, there has to be a consequence for when they don't do it, right? So I promise you a 2-year-old can figure out pretty quickly that what come to mommy means. I mean, if you're holding French fries or an ice cream cone or a piece of bread, they know what come to mommy. So we're sure everybody knows what come to mommy means, all right? So then when they don't do it, then there has to be a consequence. And I'm going to tread into dangerous waters here. We were talking about this before y'all got here, and I've forgotten how we decided I should phrase this. Y'all correct me if I say it wrong. Years ago, when we first started doing this in our family, and our kids were noticeably different, just because we put these biblical principles into place. Nothing special about me and Chris, nothing special about our kids. People would comment, gosh, your kids are so well behaved. What do you do? And we would respond, in error, we would respond, well, we spank them. And that was a dot in the whole timeline of what we had been doing, you know? And I regret that that was my answer, but I'm ashamed to say that was my answer. Because the answer was, we taught them what we wanted them to do, and we ensured that they were capable of doing it, and we hung with them while in their little childlike minds they were learning to do it and learning to comply, okay? And then when they demonstrated that they absolutely knew what they were supposed to do, when they did not, we spanked them now. So that's really more than, well, we spanked them. You understand what I mean? That it wasn't the spanking, it was the consistency, it was the kindness, it was that we were calm, it was that those things trump swatting a kid on the thigh. So while we're talking about that, let me tell you what I mean by spanking. And because I've seen both parents who would never, in their words, never spank their children, yet they belittle them. They compare them negatively to the siblings. Your sister can do this. She can behave. I don't understand what's wrong with you. Why can't you behave? And I think you're going after them personally instead of the behavior, you know. And that is chipping away at their spirit, and that is wrong. And I've seen parents who call it spanking when they get to the end of their rope and they grab something and they smack a kid. That's hitting a child. And I am not talking about that. So the information that we read was this very specific process. And you will all have to decide on your own what you feel the consequences are going to be. You know, the Bible tells us that God disciplines those he loves, and that is a mark of us as sons and daughters, is that we are the father who loves his children disciplines his children. There you have it. Now, how we discipline them is open for a little bit of discussion, but I don't want to get into that too much right now. And part of that is because I don't know everybody, I don't know your backgrounds, I don't know what you bring to the table, and so I don't want to give anyone a tool that could be harmful to their children or harmful to them. Spanking was only reserved for outright rebellion, which is, I will not do what you have asked me to do. Whether you're 2 or whether you're 7, when a child says, I will not do it, then we would spank them. And here's what it looked like. And then I'll get back to first time obedience. I just kind of want to clear this up right now. Whenever we would spank a child, number one, we were never out of control, angry, frustrated, never. If the situation were so volatile that I found myself that way, the spanking could wait. Maybe the kiddo was still going to get a spanking, but the spanking could wait until I could deliver it in a way that would have been honoring to the way God tells us to treat people, with respect and kindness. And we do get punished. We do get disciplined for the things that we do. Anyway, so whatever it was that they were doing that was rebellion, I would, it was always at the beginning of the instance. When you I don't know, when you tell a 4-year-old, I want you to put your toys away, please. And they go, That's rebellion. Okay, well, okay, come on, you're going to get a spanking because mommy told you to put your toys away and you refused to do it. So I would take them in a private place, I would sit down with them and I'd say, now, you're going to get a spanking because I told you to put your toys away and you looked at me and said, mm-mm. And that's rebellion, you're going to get a spanking. And we used a little, like a 1/4-inch dowel, and I just spanked them on the thigh. If they had diapers, you forget that because, you know, just get a little toddler thigh. And the point was not to leave a mark. The point was not to harm the child. The point was just to sting. And I would do it, we would practice on each other because we were like, oh my gosh, I don't want to hurt anybody. This is too hard, you know, we would practice on ourselves. So anyway, that was a spanking. And then after I had, you know, maybe 2 swats, and I would say, okay, once again, you got a spanking because I told you to put your toys away and you refused to do it. Now, why did you get a spanking? And they had to confess to me why they got a spanking. Okay, good. And then we would pray and ask God to forgive them for being in rebellion, for disobeying mommy. I love you. Life is good. Let's go on about our business. And that was it. And I never brought it up the rest of the day. If you do that again, blah, 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 blah. There isn't that holding it over them. So I kind of want to be sure that I'm laying the groundwork, and this is either what I've just described to you is either very different than what you think of as spanking, and I don't want a show of hands, or hopefully it is what you think of as spanking. I mean, my parents spanked me when we had a discussion about what we got growing up, and my parents spanked me growing up, and it's interesting. They didn't ever spank me when in anger when they were out of control. And so I hope you understand my hesitancy. In this culture, I mean, you don't even want to say the word, you know, lest someone come after you and accuse you of abusing a child. But I think that the Bible gives us enough principles that we can see that when rebellion happens, a price has to be paid. And so you as parents have to ask yourself, does sending my kiddo to time out in their room alone accomplish the purpose? Maybe it does, I don't know. So the bulk of your time is going to be spent with the thoughts that you have begun to put together for your family, what it is that's important for you to see in your family. Directing those behaviors, training those behaviors, okay? And then if you care about other things like, I don't know, table manners or, I don't know, whatever you care about, even things like, and we do this in other areas probably, if your children begin to help you with chores and they fold the towels, you teach them how to do it. And we don't even think twice about that. And we don't chastise them when they get it wrong. We say, well, not almost, but let me show you again. Here, you try. And that's the kind of attitude that you have when you're teaching your kids to obey you the first time. Remember, it is immediately, cheerfully, and just like you said. Now, some of you have older kids who are already maybe in habits of not obeying. And when I say older, I'm talking like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And the truth of the matter is, like in our case, we didn't know what we didn't know. And that's probably the case for a lot of you guys. You just didn't, no one had ever told you could actually proactively teach your kids to obey you. And so there's grace for you and us, you know, when we didn't know. But I would suggest you go, if this is the situation you find yourself in with an older kiddo, and you feel like they could understand what I'm going to say, I would suggest you go to them and you say, you know what? We have just learned some information that we feel is in line with God's Word. And we want our home to look like XYZ. And we feel like implementing these practices will help us to get there. It will help us grow as believers. It will help you grow. And I think it will help our relationships as a family, it to be more pleasant atmosphere. And so we're going to start trying this. And I'm probably going to mess up. And I'll ask your forgiveness when I mess up. And you're probably going to mess up. And you might want to ask my forgiveness when you mess up. And we're just going to do this together. And if you just tell them, kids are incredibly gracious when they sense that we're not being hypocrites and making ourselves out to be perfect and infallible. And when you come to them in a humble attitude and say, we didn't know any of this, and now we do. And so rather than say, well, we didn't know that in the beginning, we're just going to suck it up and go on about our lives and never put into practice anything that might change our world forever, just go to them and say, we didn't know, and we're going to try, and we'll probably, bumble through, but we'll do the best we can. Certainly, if there are teenagers involved, they can absolutely understand this. And again, we mentioned this before, your kids know you're not perfect. I think for older kids, you're not going to put them on a blanket, and you're not going to, call them when they're playing with toys, but you could set up similar training things like, let's just play a game. Let's just start with you listening for mommy calling your name, because they probably got headphones in. Depending on the age of the kid, they could have headphones in, they could be engrossed in something. So let's just start there. I'm going to practice. You just listen for me to call your name. And you just start there. And you have the ability with an older child to get them on board with you, by their own volition. Whereas a young child, you're kind of just directing their will. But an older child, you have the ability to bring them alongside you, and let's do this together. So first time obedience, immediate, cheerful, and just like I said it. So the whole just like I said it, I want to park on that for a little bit. When your kids are little, they might not always get to do it just like you said it because they're not able. So we extend grace, all right? But you use the just like I said it when they get old enough to do it, and you can tell that they're deliberately not doing it. And that is it is all those things, And the whole cheerful thing is so important. Now, we have kids who in our family who are what I call an Eeyore type personality. They're just sort of gloomy. They're just not your ray of sunshine. Y'all have all seen a kid who's the ray of sunshine and the one who's not, okay? Not saying we want to teach our children to mask their feelings. That was something else that was brought up last week. I'm saying that God is pretty clear about how we're supposed to treat people, and he doesn't qualify it with when you're feeling it. So you know that your feelings follow your actions. And so when we encourage and then enforce by our consistent attention to it, cheerful attitudes, it spills over into habits. And you learn that, my gloomy Gus, I can maybe save for at home. But generally speaking, when you go out in the world, people are more responsive to you if you smile, if you are not an Eeyore personality. And things just go better for you. I mean, when you go to the DPS office to get your driver's license, the lady or the guy behind the desk, you're just hoping they're going to smile at you, So we're teaching our children habits for life, not just in our home. So I'm not suggesting that the component of cheerful is to make kids be who they're not. I'm not trying to turn an Eeyore into a Tigger. I'm just saying that we don't get to pout about, and stomp our feet and drag our feet when mom and dad tell us to do so. And then back to the immediate thing, excuse me. It's not obedience if we do it a half hour later because that's on our terms. So it is all three components that make it really obedience and not just acquiescing to your request of something. Let me address one of the issues that came up, the two things that came up last week. I talked about the first one, which I've already forgotten what it was, but I do know I talked about it. The second one was squashing your kids' feelings. We don't want to, the question a mom asked me afterwards was, when her child throws themselves on the floor and pitches a fit and is totally out of control, if I try to rein that in, aren't I getting in the way of them expressing their feelings? And the answer is yes, you are getting in the way of them expressing their feelings, but it is a completely inappropriate way for a kid to express their feelings. It is our nature to want to just let it all hang out, but that doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. We are to be sober-minded and self-controlled, and now obviously that varies in its appearance according to the age of the person we're talking about, but requiring your little one who's throwing a fit on the floor to not do that is not squelching their feelings. Now, they do get an opportunity to voice their concerns when they're calm and in a respectful way. So there is this yes, you obey me, and then let's hear what your concern is afterwards in a respectful way, but first you have to obey me, okay? So we're not trying to squash people's feelings. That's not a biblical principle, to squash people's feelings, to keep it all under wraps. That's just not, not the way it is. It does bring up a good point. And in all honesty, I couldn't say, oh, well, if you just do this, that will mitigate that problem and fix it just like that. I couldn't say. I will say, as a kind of a basic principle, well, let me talk about for us first. For us, my goal was to, as soon as the boys got big enough to argue with me, like when they were my size, my goal was to defer to Chris. So can you keep that thought in your mind for a minute while I go off on just a little slight bunny trail? Okay. When you're teaching first-time obedience and they're not obedient and you are going to give some kind of consequence, whatever the consequences you have decided you're going to do, you need to do it right away. So there's an immediate connection, especially with a young child. There needs to be that immediate connection. An older kid can wait till dad gets home. Now, I'm not suggesting that for some is a form of parenting, which is just being lazy and putting it off because you don't want to deal with it, so you let dad deal with it when he gets home, which is not fair. He's just walked through the door and you give him, a list of 5 kids who all are, needing to talk to dad when he gets home. However, when your boys get older, they probably need to talk to dad when he gets home. Our feeling was we didn't want our sons to, when they were in preteen, approaching that age, we didn't ever want them to be dominated by a woman physically. So I wouldn't spank a 12-year-old boy. But men have a whole separate way of dealing with one another, and I'm not talking about physically violent or anything like that. I'm just talking about if you've ever watched a group of men resolve conflict, it's a magical thing. And everybody goes away and they're all friends, and I can't figure it out because girls don't work that way. But so when, like a 12-year-old boy, I think I would seriously get dad involved and say, we're going to have to, and I think I would acknowledge, you're bigger than me and you don't have to do what I say. All we can do is appeal to them. If their dad's not in the picture, then I think it's helpful to get other men involved. And again, you just have to, it's not an ideal situation where you can bring a consequence immediately with a man. But I think, and guys, y'all chime in here, I'm thinking that there's a lot of power in saying, you know what, I think we'll, and you have to have established relationships beforehand, before this situation might arrive, but I think there's a lot of power in saying to a young man, I think let's go talk to Mr. Chris. I think that we need to get a man involved. I am thinking, wow, this is uncomfortable, isn't it? But I am thinking.
No, it's really not. We're really not. We really want an answer because this is an actual true thing
Well,
that we're battling right now.
I do think, so I've never experienced this, so I can't say firsthand knowledge, but I do think there is great power. You have great power, Jonathan, over a young man who loves and respects you. And for you to say, you don't ever treat Maria that way, whether you are, you don't act that way here, and you don't ever treat your mom that way, ever. One of Chris's favorite phrases, which was a real stunner to the boys, and I never understood it, but boy, they understood it, and that was, don't ever treat my girlfriend like that. And they'd be like, yes, sir. And it would stop. So you would have to take decisive action. And by that, I don't mean, like, oh, you just need to whip him in shape. That's not what I'm talking about at all. But saying, you sort of putting your protection on Maria and extending your authority to her household because he is your son. You're just starting. So while it's frustrating and made more difficult by the situation where you don't, he's split between 2 homes, I think the spillover will be an increasing, oh, I see, there is going to be this consistency in holding me accountable. And if Jonathan, begins to participate and extend his authority and protection over you, it's not going to be an immediate thing because he's got years of, whatever attitudes he's had. But I do think you have great power too in not antagonizing him with your words. And I don't know, I'm not saying that because I've seen you do that. I'm just saying I know that we women can belittle our sons in an attempt to control their behavior, and you never want to belittle him. So I think you just be careful, and like I said, it's not an accusation because I have no idea. I'm just saying that in our effort to try to control a situation that we can't, we use words, and sometimes we can be cutting and disrespectful. And remember, we talked about, to a young man, disrespect means lack of love. That's, I wanted to equip y'all in these 4 weeks with some actual practical things. And then I want to talk about husbands and wives and its impact on raising kids, and mothers and sons, and healthy relationships, healthy bodies, healthy sleep, all those things, yeah. Well, but I think did I just think it, or did I actually say it? You can't just put it off and wait till Dad gets home. You got to be dealing with the little things. But I really feel like it's mostly the boys that really need to have a meeting with Dad when they get home. Sometimes I don't. Some girl.
And there were times, as I recall, when it was getting hairy, and you would call me and say, "Luke needs to talk to you."
Yes, and I hand him the phone. Well, and so, there's all kinds of creative things you can do. And I realize everybody's situation is different, but think outside the box. So we have sent kids to work with him, and we have, I would hand them the phone, because Chris, and see, here's where it goes back to us ladies. Chris would say, you cannot engage. Once they do whatever, which was the first step to, young boys being mouthy at me, call me. And Chris would always say, because I'd try to fix it, and I'd call him, and he'd be like, I can't help you if you don't call me right away. And so I have to abide by his instruction. I'm under his authority. And as soon as they would start to get smart-mouthed or whatever, I would just pick up the phone and, but I realize everyone's situation is different. So, like I said, we've sent some to work. We've done all kinds of things. Actually, let me just throw this out here for your consideration. Especially in the beginning, I would not try to take the 21 rules of this house and implement all those character qualities. No, pick a few, And I think it's really important that we embrace humor, okay? So there's a lot of things that it just gets old, and gee whiz, Mom's got like walking around with a clipboard, checking off, are we doing all these things? So bring humor to bear on whatever it is you want. So in our span of raising kids, we would make them do push-ups, and then it became a contest. They'd start getting smart aleck or whatever, and it wasn't quite warranting something, more drastic. So I'd think, you need to expend some energy, so give me push-ups. And then things that can escalate to being disobedience, leaving your clothes out repeatedly, over and over. How many times am I going to tell you to pick up these clothes? So I got some packing tape, and they would stand there, and I would hold all their clothes, and I would tape them to their body. And so we were homeschooling, so they would wander around the house all day with socks and underwear and T-shirts flapping around their body, and then their friends would come to the door. Yeah, sorry. Anyway, but it was a way to get their attention in kind of a lighthearted, humorous way. Everything doesn't have to be onerous and have some kind of big, consequence attached to it. So table manners were a big deal for us. When they would have bad table manners, we'd make them stand up and eat, which is surprisingly difficult. And the point being, draw attention to what you've done wrong. And I used to make them, when they would leave stuff everywhere, I would say, okay, you left your bin of Legos over there by the table. Would you go stand over there, please? And truth be told, I carried a kitchen timer in my pocket. And I would set the timer for 5 minutes. And that kid would have to stand there by the table with his Lego bin for 5 minutes. And when the timer would go off, because I would forget, you talked about that, you forget, I would forget, otherwise I'd go back over there. Now, why are you standing there? Because I forgot to put my Lego bin up. Okay, go put your Lego bin up. Instead of just saying, go put your Lego bin up, I wanted to bring something to bear, but in a lighthearted way. Just so it's not oppressive, to live in your home. And so you all have your own fun ways of making things happen. And so I encourage you to bring some fun. But so the attitude is really just right up there with the actual action of the behavior itself. I mean, it is of vital importance. So in the beginning of an attitude issue, I would always model for them, here's what it needs to sound like. And again, I'm not trying to turn, and it's not to say that when you're unhappy about doing something, you put on a smile. No, it's just we're not going to pout. And, everybody knows what I'm talking about when a kid does something and they make you sorry that you asked them to do it. So we would always demonstrate, Sadie, you're whining, I've asked you to do whatever, and you've said, yes, ma'am, or whatever. So you need to say, yes, ma'am. And so she has to do it back to you. Yes, ma'am. And so we would, and this is in our household, because everyone has different, you are different places in the training process. So we would work on that and work on that and work on that. But if after a while, I was having this conversation about this same attitude every time, then it's rebellion. And Sadie knows. She's a lovely little lady, and she knows. Yeah. So I was just telling Mark this story because Chris asked me, so what are you going to say if they ask a question like Beth? What about, like in our case, we spanked for rebellion. And sometimes rebellion manifested itself in an attitude like that. So one of our children, who shall remain nameless, I guess I should leave him nameless. He doesn't live in this house anymore. That narrows it down to 5. Anyway, so he would obey, but every time I would tell him to do something, he'd go, and I would correct him and correct him and correct, and I'd make him say, yes, ma'am, and he'd say, yes, ma'am, and the next time I asked him to obey, he'd go, I don't want to do that while we're filming. Anyway, after a while, it became evident that this was just rebellion. He could certainly stop. It's not like his body involuntarily made that noise. He could stop himself. So we said, you know what? When you respond with that noise, that's rebellion. And we made it clear. He was old enough to understand that's rebellion, and rebellion is dealt with a spanking. It's your choice now. And he just did it, not like for a grand long more time. But they are going to test you. Does she really mean it? And, Jamie, you made the comment today about how it is, you just have to, like when you give them an instruction, you can't walk away. You have to stay there to be sure they do it. And I left that out, and darn, we're here at the end. I left that out, but that is so vital when you're teaching them whatever you're teaching them that you want them to obey. You have to watch them doing it. Like when I was at the kitchen, I was watching to see that he got up immediately. And when he didn't get up immediately and come to me, I immediately went to him. You can't do it 3 or 4 minutes later. Otherwise, it's not immediate. So it is a job you're doing. It is and so you can't say, I'm just going to send this email and see if he did it. No, you give your kid an instruction, which is why I always say, don't ever give an instruction that you don't plan to stop what you're doing to enforce. So you have to watch that. And it sounds like, oh my gosh, this is so oppressive. No, and it's just temporary while they learn that mommy and daddy really do mean, what they say. So my sad answer is, when we think it through, it's like, oh, darn, that they are choosing to respond in a disrespectful way. That is one of the pitfalls of actually, once you get this ball rolling, it sort of feeds on itself. And the younger kids watch the older kids and they go, oh, when mommy says something, they do it. And they kind of like, oh, I'm not saying you're not going to have to train your little ones because the older ones' behavior is going to train them, but it does kind of feed on itself. And that's where you have to be careful, because you can get in the habit then of you just start issuing instructions because you're so used to everybody doing what you say, and they stop doing it, And so then you find yourself repeating yourself, and you think, wait, what happened? You know, and again, it's not like I'm so great and wonderful, you should do what I say the moment I say it. No, it's I'm the one God has put in authority, and when I tell you to do something, you need to do it immediately because that's the plan. For safety reasons sometimes, just for practice, for godliness other times. Our philosophy was, let's get them obeying in the home, and then I'm pretty sure things are going to go way better when we go places. And that is the case. But I definitely would leave, and we have left full grocery carts. And when you've got a whole bunch of kids you've taken to the store, and I'm thinking, oh gosh, this is so irresponsible. The employees are going to have to put this back. Some of it's going to go to waste. There's meat. Oh, there's ice cream, you know. I feel sorry.
Yeah. So maybe you should plan a training session.
Yeah.
That goes with an empty cart.
Good idea.
Yeah. Walks around the store.
Yeah. Or just consider crackers.
You're not even worrying about
Yeah.
groceries being left behind. You're just
Yeah.
leaving after the behavior happens.
Mm-hmm. And see, that's a really good idea. And most of the time we never would think of going to those lengths to train our children, and shame on us. You know? Really, shame on us for not, if that's what it was necessary. It might not be necessary, but
I started taking them out on little training trips. You know, it was like something like, we're just going to go in HEB and get 2 things. We're going to do this. And I was trying to practice it like that and use all the, you know, tools that Bev was giving. And it's gone so good. And like by the 3rd outing, they were complimented on their behavior. And I'm like, this is the best. I can go places with you guys. But we did the short training sessions, and I tried to put everything forth, you know, like the things she was talking about, and just kind of prepare them. And now we're like gradually extending. So the training session idea really worked.
we're going to see moms in the grocery store with nothing in their cart. Children all around, nothing in their cart, up and down the aisle.
The video, didn't you?
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Well, y'all should see each other. And speaking of that, I hope, now, so we got one church and one church. I hope that y'all will band together because, yeah. Yeah, we know you did not. I hope you will take advantage of the like-minded families because it can be so helpful if there are other families who are, they don't have to be on the exact page number you're on, but if you're in the same book, you're trying to, you know, they're listening. Oh, Jamie just told, you know, 1, 2, or 3 to do something and they're not doing it. I'm going to go get them and say, Mommy told you, and you know, we can help one another. And furthermore, we can begin to raise children that other families want to be around to play with.
We noticed just going to her, we went to her house a couple weekends ago and we were talking about it afterwards, and we're like, you know, there was 8 kids there, but it was the most peaceful time we've ever had with 8 kids.
They
Isn't
were
it great?
so sweet.
They were so good, they were so sweet, it was not the normal behavior, we just couldn't believe it. And then we get home and we're like, what happened? What's going on here? And we only had 4, you know.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
so they were like, we were perfect.
Well, it really can be it can really work in your favor if you get with like-minded families and everybody's even just trying, you know. Yeah. Let's pray. Father, you are so gracious and kind, and you meet us in our point of need. And I pray that you would meet every need that was spoken and unspoken here tonight, that you would work in these families to heal relationships, to strengthen relationships, and bring joy and peace and laughter and love to their homes. I pray that you would reward the efforts of the moms and dads, that they would be encouraged to try harder, and I pray for creative ideas to implement things that would maintain a spirit of playfulness and joy in their homes. And in all we do, Father, be glorified and let others notice not the behavior of our kids, that is the end goal, but that it brings glory to your name. In Jesus' name, amen.